In the middle of a lavish daytime banquet, the wealthiest guest slammed his hand down on the table and snarled, "I will never eat this cheap bread." But what he didn't know was that loaf had been baked by hands whose truth would leave the entire room frozen in silence. The midday sun slashed straight through the towering glass windows, pouring into the opulent hall of a five-star hotel. Each blade of white light cut across the deep crimson carpet like a sharp knife, leaving streaks of brilliance behind. Every crystal glass caught the glow, sparkling like tiny diamonds with every slight movement. The faint aroma of Italian coffee mingled with the buttery warmth of freshly baked pastries, filling the air with both elegance and excess. Velvet-covered chairs pulled close to the banquet table draped in pristine white linen. French, Italian, and Japanese dishes were arranged with meticulous artistry, translucent slices of pink salmon, glistening pearls of black caviar, tender slices of Wagyu beef, releasing smoky wisps that danced with the sunlight. A feast for both the eyes and the palate, a grand symphony of luxury. And then amid the chatter of the elite, the ringing laughter, the clinking of glasses, something appeared. Small, humble, but blinding in its contrast. A loaf of bread. It sat in a wicker basket lined with white cloth. Its crust dark brown and rough, dusted with a thin veil of flour like specks of sunlight at the door. Not glossy, not decorated, but its scent, sweet, rustic, disarmingly simple, drifted into the lavish air, like an off-note in a polished symphony. And its presence shattered everything. A metallic pause rang out. Knives and forks stopped. Laughter clipped short. Every gaze turned toward it. The man at the head of the table slowly set down his wineglass. He was the wealthiest, most powerful guest in the room. A navy suit tailored to his broad frame. A golden tie glowing under the daylight. On his wrist, a Swiss watch catching the sun in sharp, glinting flashes. His face carved in stone, his eyes deep, cold, arrogant. His brow furrowed. A line etched between his eyes. Then the corner of his lips curled into a smirk of disdain. He raised a hand toward the bread, his voice low, resonant, each word striking like a hammer. "What kind of trash is this?" No one moved. "At $1 million banquet, and you dare serve me this cheap bread?" His voice wasn't loud, but it reverberated sharp, undeniable. The whole room froze. A guest beside him covered a laugh. Another leaned in, whispering, "Ridiculous. Market bread at a high-class banquet." Laughter spread, first soft, then sharper. Blades of mockery slicing invisible wounds into the heart of the girl standing by the table. The young waitress, her face pale with fatigue. Sweat dotted her brow, her trembling hands. Sunlight struck her, fully exposing every drop of sweat, every flicker of trembling lips. She bowed her head, fighting for composure. But in her eyes, shame and dread surged uncontrollably. The wealthy guest did not stop. He lifted his silver fork and tapped it against the rim of a crystal glass. Clink. The shrill sound cut through the brilliant air. He leaned back, voice steady but razor-edged. "I came here to be served the finest, the rarest, what befits my stature. Not bread meant for commoners." The atmosphere tightened, heavy, suffocating. An imaginary camera zooms in the waitress's face, eyes rimmed with red lashes, trembling lips pressed shut. Her hands clenched tight behind her back, shaking. She longed to explain that the bread was not placed there by accident, but her throat locked. Whispers slipped across the table. Maybe the chef is playing some kind of trick, or testing if he can tell the difference between gourmet and street food. Laughter rippled again, cold, sharp. The man leaned forward, eyes narrowing, voice dropping low and threatening. "Take it away. Now, or I'll make sure you pay dearly for this insult." The threat landed like a knife, not only on her, but on the entire room. Silence swallowed the banquet hall, though sunlight still poured in, as if the brightness itself had been cast into shadow by his presence. The waitress bit her lip, eyes brimming. Her heart pounded with painful force. And in that moment of despair, an image flickered in her mind. A boy in the kitchen, hands dusted with flour. His innocent smile, his voice echoing, "Sister, I'll bake it really well. I want everyone to taste my bread." Tears rose, but she would not let them fall. The hall waited, everyone expecting her to bow her head to carry the bread away to bear the humiliation. The clock ticked, loud, slow, relentless. 1 second, 2, 3. No one moved. The air suffocated. And then, a voice rang from the back of the hall. Deep, warm, but commanding. "Do you even know who made that bread?" The room shuddered. All eyes swung to the source of the voice. The small loaf still sat untouched on the table. In the flood of daylight, it no longer looked ordinary. It glowed. It carried weight. It was no longer bread, it was a secret, a truth, waiting to be revealed. Sometimes the very thing most despised holds the power to bring the mighty to their knees. Noontime sunlight poured through the towering glass windows like walls of crystal, exposing the entire world inside the luxurious restaurant. On the deep red carpet, Long streaks of light spilled like silk. Every movement of a waiter, every setting down of a crystal glass fractured the beams into 1,000 shimmering shards. The air carried faint traces of Arabica coffee, fine orange zest, and melting butter from golden croissants fresh out of the kitchen. From the corner of the hall, the piano dropped soft, precise notes clear as droplets striking crystal before dissolving.
Ciao.
The restaurant belonged to the city's most renowned five-star hotel. Outside, a grand boulevard swept with wind, luxury cars sliding past, leaving fleeting shadows on the pavement. Inside, another world, classical oil paintings, fresh flowers arranged into arches, tablecloths folded to perfect creases, silver cutlery aligned like a disciplined formation. Everything whispered to the guests. Here, even silence has a price. She stood in the middle of it all, small, dressed in the crisp black and white uniform collar fastened tight. Her hair tied back a strand fallen loose across her damp forehead. The black shoes on her feet were worn but polished well enough to mirror the stitches of the red carpet. In her hands rested a large silver tray that reflected everything above the chandeliers, the floral arches, the flood of sunlight, and her own face calm on the outside, trembling within. She could hear her heartbeat more clearly than the piano. Fast, loud, then skipping as if missing a step. She told herself, stay calm. Her fingertips brushed the rim of the tray. Cold. The sensation anchored her to the ground, kept her from dissolving into the butter-scented air. Because today was different, very different. Today, the tray she carried did not hold only polished cutlery or neat baskets of sliced bread like every other day. Today, it carried something so simple it felt almost out of place, a single loaf of bread. The crust was rough, dark brown. A fine veil of white flour clung to its cracks like dust caught in sunlight. Its fragrance was warm, round, tinged with honey yeast, and the memory of mornings in narrow old alleys. A scent that made one pause, puzzled, wondering. In a room this expensive, why is there something so humble? She knew the answer. Because of him. Behind the grand hall, the kitchen was another worldwide, busy humming like a great machine. Dozens of chefs in white coats and tall hats moved swiftly like smoke in motion. Knives struck cutting boards. Oil hissed in pans. Ovens exhaled hot breath like beasts of fire. On the wall, charts of assignments, times, and standards hung in strict order. In the corner of the pastry section, a small window opened to the midday sky, a neat square of blue where a single beam of sunlight tilted down onto a wooden table. At that table, a 13-year-old boy kneaded dough. His hands were small knuckles sharp from thinness. Each time his palms pressed down, the dough folded and rose again, soft, alive, breathing. Sweat streaked across his forehead, blending with flour into pale smudges he didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on something inside that lump of dough, as if within the tangled strands of gluten lay a hidden path, a dream. And if he worked long enough, patiently enough, that path would reveal itself. Sister, he had said last night when the kitchen was nearly empty and only the ovens crackled. Tomorrow, let me bake one really good loaf. I want people to eat it and know my name without ever seeing it on the menu. She had laughed. People don't care about names. They care about taste. If it's good, they'll remember. That was what she said, but her eyes had betrayed a glimmer of something she couldn't hide. She looked at his hands. The hands that had learned to knead dough in long evenings after school, hands sometimes purple from rinsing in cold water, sometimes raw from standing too close to the oven. Hands that knew how to shape a dream into a round, dark-crusted loaf, fragrant with life. This time it'll be better, he insisted. I changed the yeast. I let the dough rest long enough. I folded it 3 times, and I'll add a bit of Aunt Tu's honey. The oven has to be hot, 240 degrees, then lower slowly. I wrote it all down. Where's the notebook? She asked. He held it out, a small booklet nylon cover scratched from use. Inside, his handwriting was careful, deliberate. Young but determined. Notes on temperature, timing, steam. His own symbols, stars, arrows like flight paths sketched for a paper airplane reaching toward the sky. She ruffled his hair. Tomorrow. If we can place it on the main table, I'll whisper a wish into the piano just for you. What kind of wish? That someone will take a bite and fall silent. Silent. Yes, because it's so good they can't say a word. She smiled. He smiled back. And that smile sent flour bursting into tiny motes of light, like a fragment of sunlight caught in the fragile scrapbook of her memory. This noon, on her way from the kitchen to the hall, she had to take 3 deep breaths. The first at the revolving door, the glass spun her into 3 versions of herself. One tired, one hopeful, one afraid. She chose to walk with the hopeful one. The second in the corridor, from a niche in the wall, a painting of a woman balancing a basket of flowers seemed to look at her kindly, as if to remind her the scent of white daisies was still lingering somewhere, and she should follow that fragrance. The third at the entrance to the hall, The piano shifted into Chopin, a nocturne unusual for daylight. The music floated like a slow scarf, softening the sun, offering her a thin veil of shade. She stepped inside. The restaurant's rhythm swallowed her immediately. Waiters pushing silver carts, the head chef passing by with eyes like blades, the hostess smiling at guests with a smile too rehearsed. At a long table draped in white flowers sat men in dark suits, muted ties, their lapel pins spelling out names. Names of corporations. Names of power. They laughed just loudly enough. They turned their wrists just subtly enough to show the worth of their watches. They sat like porcelain figures glowing under the flood of natural light. She knew that table. The Dragon's Head table. The seat of the richest guest, the man who judged dishes by their price tags and waiters by their smallest mistakes. The man whose arrival made the head chef change knives, change pans, change oysters, change even. The way everyone breathed. She held the tray in both hands. The basket of bread rested quietly. Its scent, the closer it came to the sunlight, grew sharper as if carrying its own story, one no AI could ever replicate. When she set it down, she felt her heartbeat change rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Slow, then quicker, then stumbling. Before the cold voice would break out, as you've already seen in The Hook, the moment itself had been gathering like a summer storm. At a nearby table, 2 women spoke of charity. One adjusted her braid and sighed, feeding projects for children. If the PR is good, it'll make a beautiful case study. In a corner, a young man photographed his dish, the sunlight catching the lens in bright bokeh circles, so perfect they looked artificial. At the entrance, the concierge bowed to a businessman just arriving. The man's shoes struck the carpet with marks no one noticed, no one but the carpet and her. Because she saw as servers do, scanning for the details. Busy minds overlooked the splinter at the edge of a chair that could snag a dress, the crooked bow on a napkin, the water glass that hadn't yet been refreshed. She watched for cracks to patch before they broke. But today, the deepest crack wasn't in objects. It was in a gaze, the gaze of the rich guest. From the moment she set down the basket, his eyes had dropped, sliding across the loaf, like a blade over browned crust. His stare paused at the dusting of flour. His brows knitted. A cold smile split across his face. And within seconds, the room fell into a short silence brutal as a sharp elbow to the ribs. She heard the head chef's knife stop mid-cut, heard the pianist miss a note, heard the loaf's crust crack softly, a faint snap of an air bubble breaking like the whisper of a secret meeting sunlight. She saw lips begin to move, words dropping like grinding stones out of place. Strange. Disrespectful. Smiles curled, bearing perfect teeth bought with fortunes at the dentist. She swallowed the saliva thick with fear. She tightened her grip, all 10 fingertips digging crescents into the silver tray. In that moment, fragments of memory flickered. The hospital room of her mother. The fluorescent tube light stuttering, the folded then unfolded medical bill, the smell of alcohol, the tang of citrus medicine. The evenings she came home late, finding him asleep at the table, his hand still resting on a flour-stained recipe page. She had pulled the jacket over his shoulders. He'd opened his eyes, smiling faintly. I wasn't sleeping. I was just waiting for the dough to rise 10 more minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes of a child waiting for dough to rise, as if waiting for a world to grow enough faith to open. She looked at the basket. Beneath the light, the loaf exhaled steam, delicate, transparent threads, like white smoke rising from a secret prayer. She wanted to hide it, to shield it from the gaze that would soon grind it to ash. But if she hid it, where would that dream go? Into a pocket, into the back kitchen, into a someday that might never come. Behind her, someone pushed open the kitchen door. He peeked out, not daring to step in because he knew the rules, but his eyes followed her through the crack as if watching a performance. In his eyes was a second son, small, warm, stubborn. He mouthed the words soundless. "You okay?" She nodded barely, just enough for him to see. A bead of sweat slid down her temple. Cold, then vanished behind her ear. And then, like a piece of music shifting from major to minor, the tone of the room changed. The piano thinned, receding. Voices swelled forward instead, sharper, harder. The wealthy guest lifted his wine glass, set it down the stem, striking the table with a dry crack. He leaned back, chin tilting, lips parting. What kind of garbage is this? It was more than words. It was a command, a dividing line. Chalk marking us and them. It fell like hail in summer, smashing the ripest apples off their branches. She didn't answer. Her throat was pinned by needles. At the next table, laughter burst quick, then echoed by others. Bread. From the market. A joke. Who approved this menu? The words flared like shards of glass in the sunlight, slicing into flesh without spilling blood. She stood still, her eyes brimmed. No, not now. She inhaled the butter, the citrus, the linen freshly laundered. She pressed her hand behind her back, nails biting into her skin. Pain, real, grounding, awake. In the kitchen, he shrank back from the door, his young heart pounding like an explosion. He imagined the loaf as a small wooden boat striking its first great wave. He didn't know what else to do but clutch his recipe notebook tighter. His thumb rubbed over the line, bake 240. 210 steam 3 times. The thin paper wrinkled edges curled by too much oven heat. Don't cry, he whispered, not knowing if he was speaking to himself, to the bread, or to his sister. The head chef glanced at the boy out of the corner of his eye. A solid man hand scarred with knife marks, his face weathered like limestone carved by salt wind. He said nothing, but he didn't send the boy away. Some principles were never written on the walls, never taught aloud when someone puts their heart into a dish. You let that heart stand close, even if only through a crack in the door. In the hall, the hostess leaned toward the manager. The manager pushed his glasses lightly up the bridge of his nose, gave the smallest nod. He knew the next seconds would be like a razor's edge, slip once, and the restaurant's image would bear a long scar. She drew another breath. The gravity of the room seemed to rise as though the very air had grown heavier. Her arms weakened, but her legs locked. No step back, no step forward. She stood on a line so thin that even the smallest move could drop her into a void. That was when daylight, the one thing that never lies, spilled everything into the room, exposing it all. No shadows to hide in. No golden bulbs to blur the ugly edges. Every crease on the wealthy guest's brow became a line of script. Every bead of sweat on her temple a question mark. Every streak of flour on the bread a vow, I am here by my own hands. The piano stopped. The old pianist laid his hands softly on the keys, lifted his head, his dim eyes fixed on the basket as though it were a child about to be scolded. At a nearby table, a silver-haired man bit his lip, a habit from the years when he was poor, then let it go. His gaze lingered on the loaf, and memory of yeast and hunger flooded back like a tide. Take it away, the wealthy guest ordered. Now. Then the rhythm broke, sharp staccato. She gripped the tray. The boy behind the door flinched. The manager stepped half a pace forward. The chef set his knife down. The piano was silent. Sunlight cut deeper. Eyes turned. No one spoke. No one moved, except one. At the far end of the room, a figure rose. A chair slid back its legs, dragging across carpet, with a sound like scissors slicing cloth. He did not rush. He adjusted his collar. He turned to the pianist, nodded an apology for the interruption. And then he spoke. His voice was deep, clear. Not loud, but carrying that peculiar weight that makes simple words fall like stone. Do you know, he said, who made this bread? The air shifted. A current swept between the rows of tables. Heads lifted, eyes turned. The wealthy guest tilted his head slowly like a skeptical cat. She held her breath. Her heart dangled on a taut wire, swaying. In the kitchen, the boy edged closer to the crack in the door. His notebook trembled in his hands, light as the wings of a butterfly. The man took another step forward. Sunlight caught the small insignia on his lapel, an emblem only worn by those who had once set foot in the birthplace of this restaurant. The emblem the founder himself had given long ago to only a handful, the ones who had cooked, scrubbed, carried, and wept in the old kitchen, when the restaurant was nothing more than a modest eatery. He touched the rim of the bread basket, not lifting it as if afraid of bruising the fragrance rising from it. Then he looked up straight into the wealthy guest's eyes. No bow, no flinch. Or he said slowly, would you rather hear the story of the hands that baked this before deciding to call it garbage? In that instant, time pulled taut like a string so tight it seemed the slightest touch would make it snap. The piano remained silent. Sunlight froze. A lone fly drifted through the air, tracing a thin line, then vanished. Everything waited for a sign, a note, a glance, a word. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. In that brief darkness, she saw the nights he folded dough, her mother's weak smile in the hospital bed herself, wiping away tears with the back of her hand before tying her hair tighter. She opened her eyes again. Light blazed. Reality cut sharp. But there, around the breadbasket, was a new outline. The outline of hope. What story? The wealthy guest smirked. About a market loaf? Scattered chuckles threatened to rise. But this time they stalled, rolled across the table like marbles losing momentum. Because something had shifted. No one named it yet, but it was there. The man at the far end of the room didn't change tone. About a boy, he said, who stood by the oven since dawn, while most of us were still asleep, kneading a dream into dough. In the kitchen, the boy bit his lip. It hurt, but it was warm. The wealthy guest arched a brow. A boy? He chewed the word as if testing its worth. Cheap. He gave a thin laugh. Yes, the other man said, and about a sister who carried that dream into this blazing room of light. She blinked. The sweat on her temple dried in the air conditioning. And if you still wish to call it garbage, the man tilted his head slightly, you may do so. After hearing the story, the words fell like an invitation. Not harsh, not pleading. An invitation laid plainly on the table in daylight before witnesses of luxury, a challenge to the habit here to judge before knowing. The wealthy guest paused half a beat, then raised his glass. He swirled it slowly, the red wine running along the crystal like a ribbon of silk. He looked at the bread, at the man, at her. His smirk was gone. His eyes shifted subtly like a cloud drifting over the sun, but enough for anyone attentive to notice the storm was near. In the kitchen, the head chef clenched his fist, released it. He looked at the boy, nodded, just once. In the language of those who live by fire and steel, stand still, breathe, wait. She tightened her grip on the tray once more. Not for courage, but to remind herself that her body still had weight in this vast room. Light slanted down. The loaf exhaled a thin breath of steam. The pianist set his hands on the keys, but did not press. The man at the end of the hall drew a breath like a storyteller about to lift the curtain. And just then, when everyone waited for the first word of the story, the kitchen door creaked open. A sliver of sunlight slid in, striking the insignia on the man's lapel, igniting it like a shard of mirror. That light leapt to the wealthy guest's wristwatch, flaring into his eyes. He stiffened, tilted his head. And for the first time since the breadbasket appeared, he said nothing. Silence, but not empty, silence waiting for testimony. A chill draft from the air conditioner swept through, trembling the arch of white daisies. One petal fell. Slowly, like an invisible countdown had just begun. Behind the crack of the door, the boy clutched his notebook. On the first page, in shaky ballpoint pen, a single line was written, "The first bread I sell it will be for Mom." She saw it. As if someone had tugged hard on the invisible string that bound her to the kitchen. She drew in a breath. Sunlight pressed deeper into her lungs. Her heartbeat changed rhythm again. The man at the far end of the room began to speak. The story begins, he said, on a morning no one thought mattered, until the smell of bread filled the kitchen, and someone who had been waiting for that smell all their childhood finally breathed it in. The first note from the piano fell, very softly, from the left hand, like the footsteps of a child across wooden floors. The dragon's head table tilted its ears, and the banquet hall, bright, proud, cold as crystal, suddenly warmed by a single degree. Daylight still flooded the room, white gold beams scattering across the crystal glasses until everything glittered, blinding. Yet in that moment, the light no longer felt warm. It was a spotlight bearing down on the small figure standing motionless at the head of the banquet table, the waitress. The loaf sat there, calm, unadorned, yet the center of all attention. Like a speck of dust lodged inside a jewel, no one wanted to see it, but the harder they tried to ignore it, the more it stood out. The wealthy guest, flawless in his tailored suit, raised his wineglass. He twisted his wrist, letting the red wine ripple along the crystal's edge. The midday sun refracted through it, casting streaks of blood red across his face. A half smile appeared. Cold, venomous. "I said already, take this away." He set the glass down with a dry, hammer-like crack. $1 million banquet. The most prestigious restaurant in this city. And you let a cheap loaf of bread soil my sight. Is this some kind of joke? Laughter burst from a corner table. A young guest with hair slicked back and glossy gel leaned into his chair, clapping slowly. Well now, perhaps the restaurant is testing out the trend of minimalism. The laughter spread, rippling outward like circles from a stone dropped in water. Small, then bigger, then covering the whole hall. Nods, shakes of the head, sneers. She stood there clutching the silver tray. Her fingers were icy bone white. She fought to keep her face still, but her lips quivered as if to speak. Her throat seized dry, raw. Every sound struck her ears tenfold. Knives, clinking plates, shoes dragging over carpet chairs, sliding laughter. All magnified, twisting into an orchestra of contempt. Another guest, older, cleared his throat, pretending at sternness, though his eyes gleamed with delight. "I think this is the restaurant's mistake. But still, girl, you should know who you just offended. One furrow of his brow and your career here. Finished." The last words dropped heavy as lead. She heard them strike her chest, echoing inside. She clenched her teeth. Her nails dug deep into her palms, burning. But the pain kept her anchored, kept the tears from breaking free. No, not here. Not in front of them. The harsh light struck the loaf. The dusting of flour glowed bright as stardust. And for a flicker of a moment, she saw her younger brother's face in it. 13 smiling, flour on his hands, eyes alight. "Sister, tomorrow, you have to let me try, okay?" The image blurred her vision, thickened her throat, but she inhaled and stood still. The air stretched tight as a violin string ready to snap with a single pluck. The wealthy guest tapped his glass again. Clink, clink. The sound pierced merciless. He leaned forward, eyes drilling into hers, voice hissing through his teeth. "Did you not hear me?" I said. "Take it away." The entire hall held its breath. She trembled, but her feet felt nailed to the floor, unmoving. Inside, her heart screamed. But outwardly, she remained one small shadow facing a mountain of power. Eight. In that moment, the hall became an execution ground. She was the accused. No blades, no swords, only eyes. Eyes that froze. Eyes that mocked. Eyes waiting for her to break. And it was then she understood this was only the beginning. A giggle slipped from across the table. This time not from a man, but from a middle-aged lady in a pearl-colored silk dress, a long necklace glittering at her throat. She tapped her paper fan lightly against her lips, her voice sweet as honey, but laced with venom. Oh my. Who let a little girl bring street market bread into a place like this? How precious. Truly the funniest mistake I've ever seen. Laughter erupted immediately after. Many voices. Men, women, young, old. They laughed like a choir of mockery in perfect rhythm and perfect contempt. A businessman across the table raised his champagne flute, eyes narrowing in a sneer. Perhaps. This is the restaurant's new marketing strategy. Slip something cheap onto the table so we gossip and the press picks it up. Brilliant way to make headlines. The man beside him barked a laugh. If that's the case, then sorry, I don't want my name in the papers next to a $2 loaf. The laughter swelled, drowning out the piano in the corner. The music stopped altogether. The old pianist set his hands on the keys, head bowed, avoiding everyone's gaze. The waitress felt blood rush to her face. Her ears rang. Her heart pounded like hammers. She lowered her head further as if to shield herself from the scorching stares darting at her like arrows. "Hey, little girl." Another voice rang out deeper, half laughing, half mocking. "Did you accidentally bring food from the staff canteen out here? Or maybe you're testing your luck. Who knows, perhaps one of us actually enjoys the taste of poverty." Laughter thundered again, booming through the hall, bright as glass. She tightened her grip on the silver tray. Her hands shook so badly the tray rattled softly, giving off a faint metallic chatter. She drew a breath, but the air was thick, impossible to swallow. Her eyes burned. Yet still not a single tear fell. "Eat tomatoes." In the kitchen, the boy peeked through the crack. Every insult pierced him like a blade. His eyes burned red. His lips trembled, forming words that wouldn't come out. It's not her fault. It's mine. I baked it." He wanted to scream, to rush out, to shield his sister, to tell the world this was his dream. That if anyone deserved humiliation, it was him, not her. But he stayed frozen, held back by the rough hand of the head chef. "Quiet," the chef murmured, his voice low, steel hard. "This is not the time. If you want to protect your dream, you must give it the chance to breathe. If you run out now, it will die here instantly." Tears streaked the boy's cheeks, mingling with the flour clinging to his skin. He bit his lip until it bled, but he stood still. In the hall, the cruelty did not stop. A young guest, his face too fresh, drowning in a suit too large, laughed louder than anyone, as if proving he belonged among them, I think. This girl should take the bread back to her family. It probably fits better on her little kitchen table than here. The table roared again. The waitress trembled. Her lips clenched until blood seeped. Yet she lifted her head, eyes rimmed red, staring into the empty space before her. She would not collapse. She would not cry. Not while her brother was still waiting behind her. She told herself, I must stand. I must stand for him. Daylight still blazed, but now it was a giant blade slicing into every detail, giving her nowhere to hide. Every laugh, every cutting word fell like an invisible strike, carving pieces from her heart. But she stood, still standing. And that silence, her endurance, only made their cruelty sweeter. A shadow fell across her. The restaurant manager stepped forward. His black suit pressed sharp. His gaze cold behind thin glasses. He bowed slightly, offering a polite smile to the wealthy guest, then turned to her. His voice dropped low, quiet, but crushing with pressure. "Take it inside." "That's an order." She froze. Her throat tightened. Every sound around her dissolved, leaving only that word echoing in her head. Order. One word, yet heavy as a boulder, pressed against her chest. She glanced at the bread. It still lay there, calm, unknowing that a storm was swelling to swallow it whole. The entire hall waited. Eyes sharp as blades pressed into her skin. Everyone expected her to yield. Everyone wanted to see her bow, carry the bread away, a beaten servant. She inhaled, but the air was too heavy, thick, refusing to enter her lungs. The manager clenched his jaw, his voice biting. "Did you hear me? Take it away. If not, I'll inform the head chef, and he'll know you no longer belong here." Her heart seized. The threat cut deeper than insults. It meant only one thing, the loss of her job. And losing her job meant no medicine for her mother. No place for her brother to keep learning his craft. her family sinking into the abyss. The thought hooked into her mind like an iron claw, dragging her toward the edge. She trembled as her hand reached for the basket, her fingers cold numb. But in that instant, memory surged back. The dim hospital room. Her mother, frail breath, shallow eyes soft as she looked at them. Her voice weak, rasping, but full of love. Don't give up. As long as you're together, you can get through anything. She remembered the long nights in the hospital corridor staring at the rising numbers on the bill. She remembered her brother's eyes, red from tears but forcing a smile. Sister, I'll help. I'll earn money. I'll learn to bake and one day my bread will feed us all. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. Not here. Not in front of them. Back in the present, her hand still pressed against the basket. The manager's eyes hardened with impatience. Now. Noon sunlight struck straight down, making the sweat on her temple glisten. Her whole body trembled, yet her feet remained nailed to the floor. The mocking voices swelled again. What's she waiting for? Is she clinging to it? Perhaps she thinks that loaf is worth more than her job. Naive. So naive. So, laughter erupted once more, loud, piercing. She felt herself drowning in the poisonous sea of sound. No escape. No hand to pull her free. In the kitchen, the boy almost screamed silently. Sister, don't give it up. Don't let them take it. But his throat locked. Tears fell onto his notebook, smearing the line he'd written the night before, first loaf for Mom. It. Her grip tightened. Her fingers dug into the basket's rim, white-knuckled. Her lips split with blood. Her heart tore in two between fear and love. Lose the job. Lose the income. Lose everything. Or keep it. Keep it for him. Keep a small dream from being crushed. The Hall of Light had become a pit, and she stood on its edge. One step, one decision, everything would change. But before she could choose, the wealthy guest slammed his hand on the table. His glass jumped, red wine spilling across the white cloth. The sound boomed. The linen tore like paper. It was the sound of a death bell. Enough, he barked. Either take it away now or get out. The air strangled. Every eye in the hall snapped to her. Her heart felt crushed in an iron fist. Her breath came fast, shallow, but still she stood. No step back, no step forward. Just stood. And in the blinding light, she heard only one thing, her own heartbeat. Thud, thud, thud. Each beat a declaration, do not fall. The hall waited. The moment of decision hung suspended. The air froze. Sunlight cut through the tall glass windows like blades, choking every breath. No one moved. No one looked away. Every gaze converged on her, the small waitress clutching the breadbasket with trembling hands. The banquet hall, once a place of feasting and display, had turned into an execution ground. On the judge's bench sat elegant faces, lips tight, eyes narrowed, mouths curved in cruel delight. They needed no swords, no spears, only eyes, only laughter sharp as knives. A polished gentleman's silver hair slicked back sighed as though pitying her girl. Know your place. Don't make things harder for yourself. Another voice chimed in, if you obey, perhaps he'll forgive you. Then laughter broke out, applause light and mocking as if for a clumsy play. She stood there nearly paralyzed, feet shackled, hands burning with pain, throat parched raw. Each second dragged on like eternity. The noon light, once radiant, had become an interrogation lamp. It exposed every bead of sweat on her face, every redness in her eyes straining to hold back tears. In her head, voices clashed. Give in now. You still have your job, your mother, the money for medicine. Resist and you lose it all. But another voice rose stronger. This is his dream. If your brother sees you surrender, it will break him 100 times worse. The two thoughts twisted together, tearing her heart apart. Bete. In the kitchen, the boy pressed his face to the crack in the door. Tears streamed down as he watched his sister trembling alone beneath dozens of hostile stares. He wanted to scream, wanted to rush out. But the head chef's rough hand clamped his shoulder. She's taking it all alone, the boy sobbed. The chef said nothing. His old eyes gazed into the hall, glinting with sorrow. He had once stood in that place years ago. He knew how public shame could grind a soul to dust. But he also knew some flames only ignite when pressed to the edge. The boy clutched his notebook. Tears fell onto the page, smearing the words, Day One My Dream. In the hall, whispers spread again. She's frozen, like a broken doll. Maybe she's waiting for a miracle. There are no miracles here. She swallowed hard. Her vision blurred. Her heart dangled in midair. Her whole body begged to collapse, but an invisible thread pulled her upright. She saw her brother, the small boy by the oven flour on his hands, smiling, wide eyes blazing. Sister, I did it. She saw her mother frail in the hospital bed, yet her eyes still warm, tender. My daughter, don't let go. Don't bow your head. The words rang inside her like a bell tolling across a silent desert. Betty? Suddenly, the wealthy guest slammed his hand on the table. His glass leapt wine spilling across the white cloth in a crimson flood. The crash made everyone flinch. He leaned forward, jabbing a finger at her. "What are you waiting for? Get out." The sound struck her ears like a gavel. She stiffened, eyes wide, fear twisting tight inside. But she didn't move. No retreat, no bow. Just stood. Her whole body shook, but her eyes lit with a faint fire. The jeers crashed around her like storm waves. Yet within the roar, she heard only one rhythm, her heartbeat. Thud, 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 each beat declaring she would not surrender. The hall sank into silence again, heavy, suffocating. Only the tick of the wall clock marked time, and in that silence, the boy wept behind the kitchen door. Hot tears streamed down, but he clenched his jaw to keep from crying out. He knew if he shouted, she would lose everything. But if he stayed silent, she bore it all alone. The pain swelled, choking him. Trembling, he whispered, "Please, someone, please help her." Anashi. Daylight bore down, striking the loaf. The dusting of flour shimmered. In that moment, the bread seemed to breathe as though it wanted to speak. She stared at it, her vision blurred. And she knew this was not the end. This was only the peak of loneliness. The murmurs died down. Then rose again, sharper, harsher. The wealthy guest leaned forward, elbows pressed to the table, fingers interlaced like a trap snapping shut. He fixed his gaze on her, speaking slowly, clearly, each word dropping heavy on the velvet carpet. "The rule is simple. Either you take it away, or you kneel and apologize for offending my eyes." The air cracked. A few gasped, others burst out laughing, thrilled. A phone flashed, then another, then more. Cold, unfeeling lenses lifted high. They wanted to capture it, this moment of humiliation framed in daylight, ready to be shared, ridiculed, turned into today's entertainment. The manager flinched, almost stepping in, but one sharp glance from the wealthy guest froze him. Career, contracts, reputation. The words cut through his mind like blades. He swallowed, turned to her, his voice hard. "Do as the guest demands." The floor seemed to tilt. She staggered a step. The silver tray shook. The round brown loaf swayed inside the basket like a heart skipping a beat. Blood thundered in her ears, loud, raw, burning. Goosebumps pricked her spine beneath the starched uniform. Cold. A woman nearby clicked her tongue. "Hurry up, girl. In places like this, servants should know their place." A young man leaned close to his friend, loud enough for all to hear. "Just kneel. Wash your face. Smile after. Nobody will remember." She shut her eyes for a brief second. Her fingers whitened on the basket's rim. Behind her eyelids flickered the fire of the oven, the sweet smell of yeast. Her brother's sunburned face at the kitchen door, lips pressed, nodding hard, as if sending her a rope across the abyss. She opened her eyes. Sunlight burned into her pupils. It hurt. But inside that pain, a single bright line glowed. The wealthy guest tapped his nails against the table. Slow, sharp, a rhythm of power needing no orchestra. He smirked. 3 seconds. 1. In the kitchen, the boy jerked forward like a puppet yanked by a string. The head chef clamped his shoulder iron hard. 2. The count fell cold and merciless. At the back of the hall, the man with the pin lifted his chin just a fraction, but the manager caught it, hesitated for half a beat. Half a beat was enough to knock the air off its rails. 3. The moment stretched taut as a violin string ready to snap. She inhaled. Her knees bent slightly, all the raised phones tilted lower, adjusting their angles, waiting. Smiles held back, lips pressed tight for the shot. Sunlight carved a blade across the white linen. But she did not kneel. She straightened, thin shoulders squared, her voice hoarse, fragile but steady. "I apologize for placing before you something you didn't wish to see. But I cannot kneel for bread baked by hands that are pure." No one laughed. For a heartbeat, the room lost all sound. Only the air conditioner's low groan hummed above. The wealthy guest rose slowly. His shadow spilled across the table, swallowing the basket whole. His eyes darkened. "Then you choose unemployment." The word slammed into her chest like a hammer. Her gaze cracked. Inside the hospital, the red numbers on the bill, her mother's ragged breath in the night, her brother's tiny scrawl, "First loaf, for Mom." She pressed her lips shut, said nothing. The guest snapped his fingers. 2 security guards emerged from behind the curtain. Black suits, broad shoulders, silent. They advanced 3 steps, the smell of rubber gloves already brushing against the warm scent of bread. "Wait." A low voice cut through. Firm. Waited. No shout, only gravity. Heads turned as one. The man with the pin stepped out from the last row. Sunlight slashed across his lapel, igniting the worn insignia like a spark from an old relic. He didn't look at security. He looked straight at the guest. "You're about to turn a luncheon into an execution." If you must at least execute after you've heard the name of the one condemned. Their eyes locked. What passed between them no one could read. Only the piano struck a single lonely note, like a blink in a windless sky. The guest leaned back, smile returning colder than before. I don't need the names of servants, but this restaurant does, the man replied unshaken. And this city once did too. A murmur rippled, phones lowered slightly. The manager's thin smile flickered as if glimpsing a razor-thin path opening in a cliff. In the kitchen, the head chef released his grip on the boy's shoulder just barely. The man with the pin stepped closer, brushed 2 fingers along the basket rim, as if greeting something alive. Then he turned to her. Can you tell us the name of the baker? She stared at the loaf, at its fine cracks, each like a fingerprint. Her chest ached. For a heartbeat, she wanted to lie, to take it on herself to shield him. But at the door, her brother's tear-bright eyes waited, waiting for his name to be spoken for the first time in daylight. The baker is, she began. Enough. The guest cut her off, voice like a whip. I don't need fairy tales. He waved to security. Remove her. The guards moved. Heavy. Even. The brush of their gloves against the air sounded like chalk on a blackboard. She stepped back instinctively. The tray rattled. Phones lifted again, lenses aimed to capture power and motion. But the man with the pin did not step aside. He pivoted, blocking their path. By doing this, you break the most basic rule of this place. Rules! The guest laughed. The rule here is money. No, the man said, calm. The rule was written with bare hands and sweat, with the first oven in a cramped kitchen where the founder himself kneaded dough before anyone knew his name. Some older faces flickered with unease. They remembered vaguely the old photo in the ground floor hallway. A young man in coarse clothes, flour on his hands, smiling shyly. A humble eatery before it became an empire. The guest's lips thinned. And who are you to lecture me on history? The man didn't answer at once. He pulled a thin envelope from his jacket. Plain. No seal. Just aged paper tucked inside long ago. He laid it on the table, slid it toward the guest. If you want to know who I am, open it. But before you do, I invite everyone here to breathe this in again. He bent over the loaf, inhaling deeply. The gesture looked absurd. Yet in that instant, the whole room seemed to regain its sense of smell. Yeast, honey, warm smoke. The crust cracking softly, a tiny tick like water dropping in summer. A silver-haired man at the center table suddenly raised a hand to his eyes. He exhaled long. Whispered, "It's the same." The same what someone asked. The smell of the old place. The day I quit my job and came back. For one bite of bread. The mocking laughter faltered. Not gone, but caught stumbling. The guest lifted the envelope, turned it lazily in his fingers, then tore it open. Paper fluttered like a breath. She couldn't see the words, but she saw his eyes, eyes that only narrowed in disdain, open a fraction wider. His gaze lingered on a line. Slid to a name. Stopped at a faded round seal. He looked up. Slow. Cold. Yet with grit behind the cold. What trick is this? The man shrugged. No trick. Only a message. From the one who gave your name the reason it's been on this guest list for 10 years. The atmosphere shifted color. Phones lowered further. Lips closed. At the kitchen door, the boy stopped crying. He lifted his head like a tree battered by storm winds, leaves still trembling but trunk upright. The guest laid the paper down. So gently it made no sound. But his gaze rippled across the hall like waves of ice. He turned to her. The name. She blinked. Sir, the baker's name, he said. I want to hear it. Before I decide whether this is trash or something else. A sliver of light cut across her chest. Not victory, not safety, just the faintest crack opening between 2 locked walls. She swallowed, looked at the loaf. At the door where her brother gripped the notebook so tight its edges bent. She drew a breath. Began. His name is... The ceiling light flickered. The piano struck a jarring chord. The revolving door groaned. A figure stepped inside, wind from the lobby stirring the white chrysanthemum arch. Every head turned in the same instant. The newcomer halted in the threshold of light. His shadow stretched long. In his hand, a faded canvas bag. On his wrist, a sun-scarred elastic band. His face gaunt, his eyes deep, and the way he looked at the loaf, like a man looking at home after a long exile. The man with the pin froze. The chef froze. The silver-haired guest shot to his feet. The boy at the kitchen door dropped his notebook. The waitress swayed, her heart plummeting. The wealthy guest slowly turned. And who is this? No one answered. Only the warm scent of bread swelled from the basket's mouth as if offering a response not yet spoken. Then the newcomer's voice cut the silence. Low, hoarse, steady I came to speak about this bread. His words hung in the daylight. Every breath in the room caught in throats. Noon light still poured through the glass walls, carving sharp golden streaks across the white tablecloth. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the warm yeast rising from the loaf in its wicker basket seemed to breathe like a held breath too long delayed. The man with the pins stepped fully out of the last row sunlight, tracing a line across his lapel. He stood between the basket and the cold watching eyes. His voice was low, steady, each word pressed into the carpet like a weight. Enough. The room jolted. The piano froze midair, silenced like a bird colliding with invisible glass. The wealthy guest narrowed his eyes, the thin smile creeping back to his lips, sharp as a blade. "And who are you?" he asked to interfere with my banquet. The man didn't look at him. He looked at the waitress. A small nod, like a hand settling on her shoulder, warm, firm. Then he turned to the manager. "Let me speak." The manager hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the wealthy guest, then reluctantly stepped back. At the kitchen threshold, the head chef hand, still smelling faintly of steel, gave a slow nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said before you pass judgment, "you should know the name of the hands that baked this bread." Behind the kitchen door, the boy stopped crying. He lifted his head, red-rimmed eyes catching a strip of sunlight. The waitress froze. Her heart stuttered. She knew what was coming, but fear coiled inside her. Fear for him, for her job, for all the long days that might collapse like sugar in rain. The man laid 2 fingers on the rim of the basket, not lifting, only touching. His voice dropped soft enough that everyone had to hold their breath to hear. This loaf was baked by a boy standing just beyond that door. Phones lowered. 1, 2 quiet intakes of breath. The room rippled slightly like a pond stirred by a sinking stone. The wealthy guest scoffed. "A boy in this hotel's kitchen." "Yes," the man replied. 13 years old. School in the morning. Dishes in the afternoon beside his sister. At night he writes notes about oven heat, about folding dough, about how long it must rest. He keeps a little notebook. Worn cover. Pages cramped with careful handwriting and tiny stars sketched beside the recipes he believes in. The light shifted. The kitchen door opened another crack. His small hands were visible now, red from standing too long by the oven. On his thumb, a blister recently burst, leaving a thin crack stretching to the second joint. He tried to hide it behind his back, but daylight gave him no place to hide. It fell across his skin, turning each scar into a secret metal. The waitress clenched the silver tray tighter. Warmth surged in her chest, painful yet light, as though the invisible rope binding her was loosening. The man looked at her, then back to the crowd. "That boy bakes for one reason, simple and brutal. His mother has been in the hospital a long time." The words "in the hospital" dropped heavy, shifting the air. Someone lowered their phone. A woman slowly closed her pearl-handled fan. The silver-haired gentleman at the center table straightened in his seat. The man continued. "Every afternoon after school, he follows his sister into the back. He isn't allowed near the oven, so he learns from afar. He measures the oven's breathing with his eyes. He watches dough rise through hairline cracks in the lid, listens for the tiny tick, when the crust breaks to release steam. He tests with his nose, his ears. The patience of a child with nothing but time and belief. A cool draft from the air vents swept through. The smell of butter and honey on the crust grew sharper. At the piano, the old musician couldn't resist. He pressed a single deep chord, soft as a hand resting on a sleeping child's head. Last night, the man went on. When the kitchen emptied, he begged the chef for 15 minutes at the oven. He sprayed steam 3 times, folded the dough 3 times, scored the crust in the shape of a leaf he had drawn in his notebook. Then he watched, eyes wide, unblinking, as though that oven window was the only window to his future. The waitress let out a faint sob. In her mind, she saw it all, the oven glowing red, the wooden table trembling with heat, her brother on tiptoe, face pressed to the tiny glass as though gazing at the sky. Each time the loaf swelled, he smiled wider. When the crust turned brown, he rested his head against the oven door. Eyes closed, whispering something she couldn't hear. But she knew what it was, the prayer of a child at the one moment the world might listen. This morning, the man said he wrote a line on the first page of his notebook, the first loaf for Mom. Then he wrapped it in cloth, pressed it into his sister's hands, and told her, "Put it where the light is brightest." He believed the light would help people see his work. The natural spotlight of noon licked across the table. The dusting of flour glowed white. Silence tightened. Even the ticking clock seemed to shrink, giving way to the images just some in the hospital. The hallways smelling of antiseptic, the small hands folding dough, the trembling notebook. The wealthy guest curled his lip. "And for that, I'm supposed to eat this." The man shook his head. "No, you don't have to eat. You only need to know what you're calling trash. After that, call it whatever you want." A thin crack ran across the guest's smile. No one could tell if it was rage or unease, but everyone saw his hand, which had been tapping the tablecloth, fall still. It lay flat, motionless. Sunlight stilled with it, and the entire room held its breath. The wealthy guest leaned back, arms folded, voice curling with disdain. "Then tell it. I've got 10 minutes for a fairy tale." The man didn't flinch. He slid the wicker basket an inch closer to the sunlight, letting the dusting of flour blaze brighter. Then he said quietly, "Every fairy tale begins with a crack in real life. The siblings live 7 bus stops away," he began. "A low-ceilinged room. During the rainy season, water rises to the doorstep. Their mother worked years in a steam laundry, her lungs weakening with every shift. 4 months ago, she collapsed at work. Since then, hospital bills have ticked upward like clock hands. The tables near the windows grew still. A young man lowered his phone. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly sounded like the wheeze of a patient in the night. The waitress bit her lip. Hallways slick with disinfectant. The sharp sting of alcohol. The squeak of gurney wheels. Memory surged back like a flood. The first time she signed a consent form, her hand shook so badly the pen cut her skin. The first time she fed her mother porridge, the spoon clicked against her teeth like fragile glass. She took every shift, the man continued. Stockroom trash runs, scrubbing oil stains, then serving. The pay wasn't much, enough to survive if nothing changed, but illness doesn't stand still. The guest toyed with the gold ring on his thumb, staring out the glass. Sunlight sharpened his silhouette into hard edges, and the boy he asked, his tone balanced between scorn and curiosity. "The boy is a good student," the man said, "but he quit soccer, quit video games with friends. He came to the kitchen, asked to borrow a broken scale, asked how many marks on the oven dial, which yeast rose slower so he'd have time to finish homework. He took notes like a scientist, and endured like only the poor can endure without permission to be lazy." In the kitchen, the boy tucked his blistered hand deeper into his sleeve. He remembered the nights dough collapsed, loaves, flattened crusts burned, the acrid smoke clinging to his hair. He remembered his sister soothing him. "It's fine. Next time." He remembered her body shielding him from the oven's heat, her back taking the sting so his skin would not. The man's eyes slid toward her. This morning before her shift, she stopped at the hospital. Her mother slept still, wearing the sun-scorched elastic she used to tie her hair in healthier days. The girl slipped the new bill into a drawer, slid a soft cloth under her mother's head, and left. On the sidewalk, she paused a long time before a bakery window. A long time. The waitress swallowed hard, throat raw. Yes. She had stared at sourdough loaves priced at half a day's wages. She hadn't tasted, just studied the score marks, studied how light clung to the crust without falling. Then she walked away. Her worn shoes scraped the pavement like a tired pen rewriting an old promise. "And here," the man said gently. She set the bread on the table with the most sunlight. "That's the custom of the poor place, what you believe in, where it can be seen, hoping someone busy will pause just long enough to notice." A ripple of sighs passed through, no one admitted to making a sound. At the piano, 2 soft notes fell like an old hand brushing keys to warm them. The wealthy guest cleared his throat. "Are you finished? Poor is still poor. This is not a charity." The man met his eyes. "No one is asking for your money, only for the right to name labor for what it is." The manager swallowed. The head chef laid his knife flat on the board steel, striking wood with a dry punctuation. Behind the door, the boy's eyes widened. A thread of hope darted across his gaze, thin as a string, strong enough to tug at every heart in the room. The man went on, his tone steady, magnetic, drawing the crowd forward in their seats. The boy learned yeast by season. On rainy days, the rise was slow, he waited. On hot days, yeast grew wild, he cooled it. He scribbled in the margins, "Dough is like people. It needs to be heard, and it needs to be waited for." A lady froze mid-motion. Her pearl fan stopped dead. Someone chuckled, but the laugh broke off like a foot missing a stair. The silver-haired man shut his eyes for a second, then opened them slowly, staring at the loaf's crust cracked fine as a leaf's vein. The man continued. The sister kept him from the dining hall. She feared it. In places with so much glass, insults travel faster than air. She told him, "Let me take it." And she tucked a note in his pocket. "If anyone tastes it, you'll know by their eyes. They'll shine. Then they'll fall silent." The waitress lowered her head. She had thought herself strong then. Now, standing in this storm, she knew she was only a trembling reed. Yet her brother still believed. Believed as if the world were fair, or at least that someone somewhere would pause long enough to smell yeast. "So what's the point?" the guest sneered. "That we're all supposed to sit through a poem about dough?" The man inhaled. Light carved his brow into harsh relief. "Not yet. There is one more thing." He looked straight at the guest. "Do you know where this pin came from?" For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across those cold eyes. thin but real. "Don't care," he muttered, but his voice no longer cut like stone. "It was given to those who stood here in the beginning," the man said. "When this restaurant was only a small shop. When the founder kneaded dough himself with hands still slick from factory oil. Because by day he was a laborer, and only at night could he mix yeast. Before the suits, before the last names became menus. This place was sweat and poor flour." The waitress lifted her head. The words cracked open a door she had never seen, another history of this glass palace, one not framed in gold. Behind the kitchen door, the boy rose on tiptoe, straining to glimpse the first day being summoned, a day of few people, fewer riches. The man set both hands lightly on the edge of the table, his voice steady, resonant. "I was here that day. I learned to hear crust crack the way you hear someone breathe. I wear this pin because I bolted the first oven to the tiles with mismatched screws." He tilted his head. "And I am the current director." A hush swept the room like wind pressing a curtain. The manager straightened half an inch taller. The head chef pressed his palm briefly to his chest, then lowered it as if ashamed to be seen. The wealthy guest arched a brow, a cold smile twitching one muscle along his jaw. The director turned toward the kitchen door. "Boy," he said, "do you dare step out?" The boy froze. His lashes fluttered fast. He stared at his blistered hands, drew a breath, then pushed the door open wider. Noon light poured over him, catching the flour on his cheeks like faint stars. He took half a step, then another, until he stood at the edge of the red carpet, only a few paces from the basket. No one clapped. No one laughed. The room fell still like a lake surface holding its breath before rain. Phones sank lower. Some slid back into pockets. Others dangled in hands, their lenses angled harmlessly toward the floor. The director smiled at the boy. "You baked it, didn't you?" The boy nodded. His voice was hoarse, small yes. I let the dough rest. I folded 3 times. I steamed 3 times. I scored it like a leaf. He swallowed hard. "I wrote in my notebook, if anyone eats it, I hope they stay silent for 1 second. The silence heard that swallow. Heard his heartbeat pounding beneath the oversized uniform. Heard even the faint clatter of a spoon from a trembling hand at the far end of the hall. The director faced the crowd. "I confirm. This boy baked that bread in our kitchen. Not for show, not for pity, but to learn. To offer something sincere to this glittering world." The wealthy guest leaned forward on his hands, tilting his head as if inspecting a specimen. "Touching," he said slowly. "But touching is not a standard. Quality is." The director inclined his head. "Exactly." He turned toward the silver-haired man, still staring at the loaf as though at an old friend. "Will you cut it? Will you?" The silver knife lay on white linen. His hand shook as he slid it along the leaf-shaped score. A faint crack. Warm aroma billowed out. The crumbs shone with even open pores, moist, supple like fresh wood. He placed a slice on a plate, raised it bit. The room tilted, waiting for thunder. He closed his eyes. 5 heartbeats. 6. 7. Then he opened them, moisture glistening at the corners. He said nothing. He only pressed a hand to his chest and nodded once slowly. A soft murmur swept across the hall like a bird winging through glass rafters. Phones lifted again, this time not to mock, but to hold on to something they feared losing. The director faced the wealthy guest. "What is your standard?" The man smirked. "My standard is simple. Nothing inferior belongs at this table." The director nodded slightly, then one more detail. He beckoned the boy. "Your notebook, please." The boy fumbled in his pocket, pulling out the worn, nylon-bound book, its edges damp with tears. The director opened to the first page. Careful handwriting. A line blurred by water. "First loaf. For mother." Beneath it, rows of times and temperatures, tiny arrows marking steam bursts, 3 neat squares for folds, and one slanted sentence: "If scolded, breathe deep. If praised, breathe deep. Dough rises by breath." The room shifted, a taut string easing a notch. Someone coughed softly. Someone else set down a glass to stop the tremor in their hand. At the piano, the old musician dropped 2 off-kilter notes, just enough to crack open hearts. The director closed the book, returned it to the boy, then fixed his eyes on the waitress, her gaze wet but unflinching. Her narrow shoulders still squared her palms, still red from gripping the tray. He spoke to her, yet loud enough for all to hear. "You were right to place it in the brightest light." Her tears fell at last. Not weakness, but release. Because someone had spoken aloud the dream she had held till her body shook blue with strain. The wealthy guest laughed sharp as scissors. "Well done. A polished performance. What now? Do you want me to kneel before a loaf?" The director shook his head. "No one wants you to kneel." He tilted his chin toward the bread. "Just look closer. Look at the score marks, the crust, and these 2 hands." 2 hands, the boys blistered, the girls pressed raw by trays. Both opened, not begging, not defying, just open like a doorway anyone could walk through. At that instant, sunlight softened as if clouds crossed. The white chrysanthemum arch by the window quivered. The air thinned of perfume, and wine thickened with yeast and wood. The director's voice dropped low. "You asked who I am." I answered. "Now I ask, who are you standing before these hands?" The question rippled through the air like rings on still water. The guest narrowed his eyes, turning his ring slower, much slower. The waitress held his gaze, not defiant, not pleading, only waiting. Her heart pounded fast but steady. At the kitchen door, the boy stood tall, wide-eyed. The chef folded his arms, hiding a smile at the corners. The director slid the basket into the center of the sunlight. "If necessary," he said, "I'll sign the penalty for letting a boy near the oven. But before I do, I want to know. Do you have the courage to face the mirror this bread holds up?" "Mirror," the guest scoffed. "Yes." The director nodded. "The mirror of origin. The mirror of a place so poor it borrowed ovens from next door. The mirror of a founder who washed dishes 3 months just to learn yeast. The mirror of you if you remember eating your first lunch here with a job application still in hand." A shadow flickered across the man's face. Memory or only a cloud passing the sun, no one could tell. But his breath came longer. The director turned to the boy. "Read the last line in your notebook." The boy flipped pages dusted with flour to the end. Shaky letters but firm. "Good bread doesn't make people richer, but it can make them remember they were once poor." The room tilted like a ship through dense water. The wealthy guest shoved back his chair, the scrape loud. Every eye snapped to him, pulled by gravity. He looked at no one, only the bread, for a long, long time. Then he reached out. The ringed hand touched the crust. Light. No tearing, no breaking. Just touched. Silence. A lone drop of red wine slid further across the white cloth, stopping at the basket's edge. The director tilted his head, waiting for an answer that needed no words. And just then the main doors burst open. Wind swept in, rattling the high arch of chrysanthemums, scattering sunlight into shards. A figure stood in the threshold, clutching a folder chest, heaving as if from a sprint. The face familiar to some of the old guard. To the director. To the chef. The newcomer's eyes locked on the bread, then on the pin gleaming on the director's lapel. Their mouth trembled, half a smile, half a sob. Their voice cracked yet carried clear. "If you've kept the promise we made, then you know why this bread had to be placed here at this moment." Now it was his turn to answer by action before the next door opened, carrying yet another memory inside. The noon sun still cut the banquet hall into harsh squares of light and shadow like a chessboard carved across white linen. The warm scent of yeast swelled from the wicker basket, no longer just aroma, but testimony threading between starched collars, lingering on every breath. The boy stood at the edge of the red carpet. Blistered hands knotted together, eyes wide, forcing calm. The waitress stood a step ahead, narrow shoulders, upright tray marks still raw across her skin. The director laid his old insignia on the table. Sunlight slid across it until it gleamed like a coin dug from ancient earth. He lifted his gaze, voice low yet caring. "Now it's clear this is no performance. This is labor." The sound fell into silence like a stone into a deep well. Nobody moved. The pianist touched a minor chord, then withdrew, leaving the air strung tight as wire. The wealthy guest pulled his hand back from the loaf, his ringed fingers hesitating mid-air. He laughed thinly, a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Labor. All I see is a sermon hijacking my lunch." The director didn't answer at once. He turned the basket into the strip of sun. The flour crust glowed, the leaf-shaped score etched like handwriting. He pointed at 2 hands, one blistered, one bruised. "If you want to debate standards, we start here." Chairs scraped. Phones sank lower. A woman adjusted her pearl's eyes, softening. The hall shifted, less a banquet, now more a courtroom, rows of seats, witnesses, exhibits, and a judge without robes but with weight in his voice. "You say your standard is no room for the inferior," the director went on. "Tell me, do you measure inferiority by price, by label, or by the number of knees bent before you?" A ripple of murmurs, fine as dust motes in the sun. The wealthy guest narrowed his eyes. "Don't moralize at me," the director shook his head. "No, I'm asking about roots. Once this place borrowed ovens from next door?" The founder biked sacks of flour through rain, sat cross-legged by the heat at night. He called his bread for those too busy to brag, because after eating they went straight back to work. The guest's laugh was brittle, but the hall did not echo it. Someone exhaled slow. Someone smoothed the linen before them, as if steadying their own pulse. The waitress stared at the director. In her mind, the past unspooled a cramped kitchen, a scorched oven, the salt-burnt sweat of men who had nothing but time and yeast. And her brother's whisper, if praised, breathe deep. If scolded, breathe deep. The director turned back to the guest. You once signed a job application in this very room, didn't you? I remember that lunch. You ordered the cheapest dish. You chewed for a long time. For a flash, the man's face tightened, then froze back to marble. And your point, that all of us began somewhere unworthy of boasting. The question isn't rich or poor, only whether you remember the first taste that carried you forward. The final word struck the glass walls, bounced back like a low bell. The silver-haired diner lifted his knife and sliced another thin piece. Crack. The crust gave. Steam bloomed. The hall tilted toward the fragrance. The wealthy guest braced both hands on the table. I owe no one my memories. I pay for respect to my palate. Respect, yes. The director nodded, but not indulgence of cruelty. He swept the room. Ladies and gentlemen, a moment ago we were ready to film someone on their knees. Put your phones away. This is not a circus. Awkward movements rippled, some phones dropped quickly. Others lingered, then slipped from sight. A staffer hurried along the aisles, collecting stray gazes. The room's gravity shifted. The spotlight turned not on the girl, but on the man who had demanded her humiliation. He felt it. His posture faltered. The smile thinned. Pupils shrank. His hand spun the ring unconsciously. You mean to shame me? No one can shame a man, the director answered, unless he sees his own reflection. The words fell onto the white cloth like a bead of red wine sinking into linen. In the kitchen, the boy crushed his notebook until the cover bent. He never broke eye contact with his sister. She never broke from the basket. Their gazes crossed in the stripe of sunlight, bright blinding. The pianist struck 3 brief notes, then silence. 3 ellipses of music. The director nodded slightly. The waitress understood. She stepped forward half a pace, and for the first time her voice carried clear, no tremor. Sir, my brother baked this bread. If it is poor, I will take it away. But do not ask me to kneel for something honest. The word honest hung longer than the hum of the air conditioner, longer than the shuffle of shoes. A woman in the 3rd row squeezed her partner's hand. A young man by the window dropped his phone entirely, staring at his palms as if he had touched something wrong. The wealthy guest opened his mouth. Nothing came. Only a dry exhale like a door forced by wind. The director turned, voice sharp. Final. Before everyone here, I declare this house. The wristwatches ticked in unison. 30 seconds. No words. No laughter. Only the scent of yeast weaving through the sunlight, laying a fragile warmth across the banquet tables. The waitress let her shoulders drop. Not surrender, disarmament. Behind her, the boy felt the barbs in his chest slowly withdraw. The head chef closed his eyes a single beat, as though offering thanks in the only language a kitchen understands. The wealthy guest sat, rigid gaze flicking across faces no longer tilted toward him. He swallowed. The sound thundered inside his own head like a midnight knock. The director slid the envelope open. Under the noon glare, the parchment revealed ink faded with time, a promise, a name, a seal. One simple line. Do not let this table forget the scent of the first kitchen. A few diners recognized the handwriting. Their faces shifted as though spotting an old friend among strangers. An elderly man tapped his cane, nodding quickly, eyes shimmering. The director set the paper back, pushed it gently toward the guest. The one who wrote this is gone. But he left yeast in these walls. We who came after are simply trying not to betray it. The air thickened. Empty chatter evaporated like steam. In the silence, every sound sharpened the tick of a clock, silk, sliding over skin, the clink of a spoon on porcelain. Then the director's voice struck like a gavel. Now we speak of how you treated those who serve. He turned to the guest. You demanded she kneel. You commanded as if she were furniture. You turned this room into an arena of humiliation. Why? The man sneered. Because I paid. You paid for food, the director said evenly, not for pillows beneath your pride. A ripple of murmurs. Eyes darted. Some lowered in shame, remembering their raised phones. Some looked up, catching their own reflections in the glass ceiling, above reflections of complicity. A courtroom is not far away, the director went on. It appears whenever enough eyes see wrong and decide not to look away. The waitress inhaled deep. Her chest loosened, eyes wet but bright. She glanced at her brother. He nodded, biting his lip to dam the tears. The pianist laid down a new sequence, steady heartbeat playing. The director's voice fell low, steel under velvet. I ask you to apologize. The guest barked a short laugh. Apologize for telling the truth about bread. No, the director said. For calling a human being garbage. Stillness. Then a collective intake of breath, waves sucking back from shore. Gazes locked onto him, stripped of menus and wine glasses. The guest rose, bracing on the table, his voice strained. Who are you to judge me here? The director didn't retreat. No one judges you. You judged yourself when you demanded a kneel. I merely hold up the mirror. From the middle table, the silver-haired diner set down his knife and dabbed his hands. Sir, he said calmly. Sometimes taste begins in a throat that refuses to swallow cruelty. Scattered applause, tentative but real. Fingers meeting like timid raindrops testing a roof. The guest's eyes darted, his smile warped. He turned to the manager for rescue. The manager bowed slightly but did not step forward. The guards had already melted into the edge's shadows once more. The director spoke slowly. I do not wish to expel you. This house does not seek enemies, but there is a boundary. He laid a hand on the wicker basket. The line is here. The guest stared at it as though it had turned to a mirror. And in that mirror, a young man once scraping coins for a cheap lunch, waiting for an interview call, clutching a thin folder inside a thick envelope. A grateful smile vanished the moment the elevator doors shut. He blinked hard as if to brush away dust. Fine, he rasped. I withdraw the demand for her to kneel. No applause. The room held its breath as if cradling thin glass. The director nodded, and the apology. A fissure cracked the man's taut face. Sweat broke at his temple, glittering like salt. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened again. His voice faltered. The waitress watched him. No hatred, no vengeance, only the minimum dignity of being named human. At the kitchen door, the boy clutched his notebook and whispered, It doesn't need to be long, sister, just true. The director didn't press. Silence did the work. A cloud skimmed the sun, dimming the glare like a palm shielding harsh light. The guest lowered his head. Barely. I am sorry. The words dropped onto the linen plane, unsweetened but heavy. The room exhaled as though emerging from a tunnel. No cheering and no cries, just eyes sliding back to their rightful places. But just as relief cracked open, a new voice, unfamiliar, sharp, rang from the main doors, snapping the air taut once more. An apology is not enough. Thump, 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 thump. Heartbeats quickened. Every face turned toward the entrance. The callers all turned at once. A woman stepped in, clutching a folder to her chest. Her face was thin, her eyes deep. Around her wrist hung a sun-scorched elastic band. She stopped in the beam of light, not moving forward. She looked at the bread, at the boy, at the girl, and finally at the director. I am their mother, she said, her voice hoarse, breaking in places. And I didn't come to beg for money. I came to ask one question. In this house, what does respect mean? The room shivered as if someone had tugged a hidden string beneath the floor. The boy gasped. Mother then froze, blinking fast, hardly believing she could even stand here. The waitress lurched half a step, then stopped, afraid of exhausting her. The director stiffened, then moved quickly to offer her a chair. She shook her head. I can stand. The wealthy guest clenched his ring. His gaze flickered chaotic for a split second, then steadied again like a seasoned driver catching a skid at the edge of a cliff. The mother looked slowly around. I washed laundry for 20 years. I know the smell of sweat. I know the smell of flour. I know the smell of people despising people. I also know the difference between an apology that is true and one given only because eyes are watching. The last words cinched the air tighter. Several diners shifted uneasily. Some wanted to leave, but the glass walls pinned them in their roles as witnesses. The director nodded gently. Madam, here respect means this: no one kneels before food, and no labor is ever called trash. She turned squarely to the wealthy guest. Did you hear that clearly? He opened his mouth, closed it, then gave a single pained nod. I hear. She exhaled, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. Good. Then I ask one more thing. Don't just apologize to my children. Apologize to all the ones not invited to these tables. The ones who washed dishes, scrubbed floors, and carried trays heavier than your pride. Applause broke out. Full, dense, even. Not raucous, not showy, like steady rain on a tin roof. The guest sank back into his chair, his hand pressed flat over the faded parchment, his gaze drifting out the glass. The waitress brushed her mother's shoulder, hand to hand, warm, real. The boy clutched his notebook to his chest, his eyes glistening. The director cleared his throat, raising a hand until the room softened into quiet. His voice was steady, clear. Thank you, madam. Thank you all for staying silent when it was needed and for speaking when it was required. Today in broad daylight, we remembered something simple. Dignity does not belong to rich or poor. It belongs to hands. The final word rang. The piano answered with an open chord. The white daisies at the window trembled as if nodding. The director turned back to the guest. You may leave whenever you wish, but if you remain, I invite you to take a bite. He stared at the bread. Long. Very long. Then nodded. The silver knife slid through the crust, the soft crack echoing like a seal stamped on parchment. He lifted a piece to his mouth. Bit. No one spoke. No one breathed too hard. A face began to change. The hard edge of his mouth softened. His swallow was slow. The glare in his eyes receded. He set the piece down, drew a deep breath. All right, he said, his voice different now. "I was wrong to force anyone to kneel." The director bowed his head slightly. "Thank you." The room stirred as though it had crossed a mountain pass. Glares once cast now fell downward, no longer weapons but mirrors reflecting back on their owners. In the kitchen, the oven flame flickered once like a wink. The boy smiled. The girl smiled through tears. They hadn't defeated anyone. They had simply held on to something no one could strip away. But just as the heartbeat of the room steadied, the manager received a call. His face blanched. He looked at the director, looked at the doors, swallowed. "What is it?" the director asked quietly. The manager stepped forward, offered the phone voice. "Hushed." "From communications." "The video. It's already online." The atmosphere plunged. The whole room dropped a step down. Murmurs rose again, not mocking this time, but anxious. The director took the phone. The screen glowed in his eyes, shaky footage comments, scrolling angry emojis bursting like hailstones. He lowered it, looked around, breathed deep. "We are about to face another trial," he said. "Out there." A heavy pause. The waitress gripped her mother's hand. The boy hugged his notebook tight. The wealthy guest sat upright, no longer draped in grandeur, but looking suddenly human. The director turned to the hall. "I will need everyone's help for what comes next. But before we step out of this glass room, one more voice must be heard." He looked toward the main doors where the street breeze still pushed in, carrying the smell of new sunlight. A shadow stretched long across the carpet. A face, half familiar, half strange, was about to cross the threshold of light. The hall held its breath once more. The piano cut out. The sun froze. Every eye swung to the doors. And the new voice was about to break. Thump, 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 thump. The last rays of noon cut diagonally through the glass dome, softened by a drifting cloud. The banquet hall felt like it had just survived a storm, chairs still out of place. Linens creased, a few glasses, tilted streaks of red wine bleeding across the white tablecloth. And yet at the center, resting in an old wicker basket, the loaf of bread still glowed. Not with the shine of gold or crystal, but with the light of sweat, of faith, of a dream held to the very end. The waitress sank to her knees. But this time not because of an order. She knelt to wrap her arms around her younger brother as he stepped forward. The boy trembled, tears still streaking his cheeks, but his small hands clutched the notebook tightly. On the last page, the smudged words blurred with sweat and tears. "Good bread won't make people richer, but it can make them remember they were once poor." Their mother stood beside them, frail, yet unshaken, her arms closing around them both. Three fragile figures formed a warm circle in the very room that had once been frozen by scornful eyes. Music returned. The pianist laid down a gentler melody, simple lullaby-like. No heavy chords, no sharp rhythms, just round, lingering notes drifting like breath. The hall grew utterly still. Then came the sounds of reality breaking through a slow inhale. Here, the rustle of a tissue there, a sigh spreading like waves. A grand lady lifted her fan to hide her face, but couldn't stop the tear rolling down her cheek. An elderly man laid a hand on his chest, bowing his head slowly. The phones that had once been raised high now lowered, not weapons anymore, but witnesses to a moment no one wanted to spoil. The director stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, but each word landed with weight, echoing across the space. This loaf of bread. Today it isn't just food. It is a reminder that dignity cannot be forced to kneel, that sweat is not garbage, that at any table there must be room for the hands that labor. Applause rose, not in unison, small clusters, hesitant at first, then spreading, thickening until it rolled together like rain on a hot tin roof. Red eyes met across the room as if all had just witnessed something larger than lunch. They hadn't simply eaten. They had relearned how to be human. The waitress lifted her head. Tears glistened, but her voice was steady. "Thank you. Not because anyone defended me, but because today my little brother saw his dream placed where it truly belonged." The boy clutched his notebook tighter, smiling shyly. That laugh, thin, pure, rang out like a shard of glass, catching the sun scattering light across the room. Their mother nodded softly, whispering, "As long as we stand together, we cannot lose." The hall shimmered. Some eyes turned away to hide fresh tears. Others stared straight at the small family as if to burn the image into memory so that when they met weary working hands on the street, they would no longer just pass by. The director lifted the wicker basket, setting the bread in the middle of the long table so anyone could take a slice. Yet strangely, no one rushed forward. They simply stood and watched, as if attending a ritual, as if the loaf were a symbol, not merely food. Each crack in its crust now seemed to carry the shape of calloused hands of sweat, dripping onto the kitchen floor of nights spent waiting on the oven's glow. A young man stepped up, asked for a small piece. He chewed slowly, then nodded in silence, eyes glistening. A middle-aged couple quietly cut another slice, shared it, then clasped hands. No one spoke aloud. Only a shared, wordless recognition that they had just witnessed something rare, truth triumphing over arrogance. By the window, sunlight struck the arch of white daisies, making them sway, as if nodding, as if smiling. The director swept his gaze across the hall, finally resting it on the family. "Today you gave us all a lesson," he said, "and I believe this lesson will not end here." Everyone understood, because outside the world had already seen the video. Comments were flooding in. Eyes were watching. The fight for dignity was not over. It had only just begun. The camera pulled back slowly. The waitress's face, the boy's face, their mother's hand, the bread glowing in the sunlight. A tear fell onto the crust, sinking like salt water, not breaking it, but making it shine brighter. The music swelled, piano stretching long notes, violin strings trembling like a heartbeat. The frame widened, showing the whole hall, once an arena, now a temporary home for truth. Money can buy a banquet, but only dignity and love can keep a home. The final silence, then the sound of a heartbeat. Thump, thump, and the screen closed, leaving the audience still breathless, wondering, tomorrow when they step outside, how will they face the hands once dismissed as unworthy? The last traces of sunlight slid down the glass dome, laying a warm golden veil over the long table. The loaf of bread rested there, quiet yet glowing like an ember that refused to die out. Around it, chairs had shifted, footsteps had thinned, but the air had not dispersed. It lingered, suspended like a piece of music waiting for its final note. The camera held on the waitress's face, red-rimmed eyes but burning bright. No longer the tears of weakness, only the gaze of someone who had walked through the storm and remained standing. Then it moved to the boy, tiny calloused hands clutching his notebook tight against his chest. And finally the frame settled on their mother, frail, exhausted, but with eyes as vast and unshaken as the sky. 3 faces, 1 family. No dialogue needed. Everyone could hear the same unspoken line. We kept our dignity. The music softened, leaving only the lingering notes of a piano gentle as breath. Then a voiceover rose, warm, steady, intimate, like a friend leaning close to whisper. Perhaps in life we have all seen a loaf of bread like this, a small act, a pair of unseen hands, a drop of sweat no one remembered, and sometimes we passed it by, or worse, we looked down on it. A pause, silence. But today's story isn't about a banquet. It is a reminder of the true worth of dignity, that no one, no matter how wealthy, has the right to force another to kneel just to preserve their pride. The camera slowly pulled back. The whole scene came into view, the banquet hall, the wicker basket, the last ray of sunlight. The voice lowered softer now. And you? Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? A moment when the weakest among us taught everyone else what strength really is? Share it. Leave your story in the comments below. Because sometimes your story may be the light someone in despair is searching for. The music swelled gently, just enough to stir the heart. The voice dropped again, close, like it was right beside the viewer. If this story touched you, don't hesitate to share it. Somewhere out there, someone may need to hear about a simple loaf of bread to find their faith again. And if you want to walk with us through more stories like this, human stories, stories of dignity, please subscribe. Every click, every comment you leave is the fire that keeps these stories alive. Spreading, reaching, touching the hearts that need it most. A final piano note rang out, falling slowly like a glimmering drop of water sliding down the bread's crust. Tomorrow when you face a pair of working hands, what eyes will you use to see them?